I never expected it to happen like this. My name is Laura Bennett. I'm 42 years old, and I've spent the last 17 years of my life working at the Marrowfield Museum, building it from the ground up. The museum wasn't just a job for me, it was my purpose, my passion, my inheritance from my grandfather, who had spent his last years restoring the original gallery before his death. I held on to that vision for years, making sure the museum maintained its credibility, its legacy, its place in the community. But today, everything fell apart in a single conversation. The meeting was brief, too brief to process anything before it hit me. My half-brother Elliot, now the museum's new director, was sitting behind his polished desk, looking as corporate as always. He had the kind of smile that said everything and nothing at the same time. It didn't feel like the guy I grew up with, the one who used to sneak out with me to explore the museum's old, forgotten corners. The man sitting across from me was all business, dressed in a suit that looked like it belonged to someone else. "Laura," he started, his tone too professional, too rehearsed. "I think we need to talk about your position." I was taken aback. "What do you mean?" "I've been here for nearly 2 decades. What's going on?" He leaned forward slightly, shifting some papers around before meeting my eyes. "The board and I have discussed it, and we feel that the museum needs a new direction, a fresh approach. We think it's time to bring in someone with a bit more, modern vision." My throat tightened as the words settled in. A fresh approach? I had been the fresh approach. I had spent years navigating every storm, every challenge. I was the one who turned the museum's reputation around when they nearly shut us down after the scandal years ago. But Elliot? Elliot had only been playing the part of a visionary, acting like he could save it all with his shiny corporate ideas. I had worked with the staff, built relationships with donors, and nurtured the museum's essence. "So, what are you saying? You're firing me?" My voice cracked before I could stop it. But I couldn't hide the hurt, not when I had poured my soul into this place. He didn't flinch. "It's not a personal thing, Laura. It's just that the museum needs fresh thinking. We've decided it's time to part ways. The board is aligned with me on this." I sat there, staring at him. The board? I wanted to ask how they could do this to me, how they could simply erase my years of work, but I stopped myself. It wasn't just Elliot. It was the whole museum, the institution I had worked to build, suddenly being handed over to someone who thought they could sweep it all into a corporate agenda. "How long has this been decided?" I asked, my voice colder now, trying to steady myself. "Just a couple of weeks," Elliot said casually, as if it was a routine decision, as if it wasn't the end of everything I had worked for. I stood up, the room spinning for a second as the weight of it all hit me. I was being replaced by someone who couldn't even understand what this place meant. My grandfather's legacy, the purpose that had kept me here, was being erased in favor of new ideas. It felt like a betrayal, but I had no words left to argue. "Before I go," I said, turning slowly, "I'm taking something with me." I walked over to a dusty shelf near the window and took the sepia-toned photo of my grandfather, the one from the museum's early days when he was restoring the original gallery. It was the one thing I had left that was truly mine, a quiet inheritance of purpose. I turned back to Elliot, the photo in my hand, and locked eyes with him. "You don't know what you're tampering with," I said softly, "but you will." I didn't wait for a response. Without another word, I walked out of his office and out of the museum. It was a quiet exit, the kind that didn't need any fanfare, just the finality of it all sinking in. As I stepped outside, I could feel the weight of 17 years lifting. But it didn't feel like freedom, it felt like loss. The next morning, I found myself sitting on the weathered porch of my farmhouse, black coffee in hand, staring out at the quiet fields. The sun was barely up, casting long shadows across the grass, and the air still held a bit of the chill from the night. My mind felt as foggy as the early morning mist. I hadn't realized how much of my life had revolved around that museum until I was no longer part of it. It wasn't just a job, it had been my entire identity for almost 2 decades. I had woven myself into its walls, its history, its future. And now, it felt like I was untangling a knot I didn't know how to fix. I sipped my coffee, the bitterness of it grounding me, but it didn't help the emptiness. My routine, my old routine, had been so tied to the museum, the early mornings, the meetings, the staff, the projects, and now all of that was gone. I didn't know what my mornings were supposed to look like anymore. The quiet outside felt louder than it ever had, and it was getting to me. My dad showed up just after 8, his old sedan creeping up the gravel driveway, the engine rattling as it always did. He was in his usual attire, a worn flannel shirt, jeans, boots, looking like a man who had never left the land. He had retired a few years ago from teaching history at the community college, but he still held on to the sense of purpose that came with his work. It wasn't the same as mine, but he understood purpose. I saw him through the window, and I didn't bother to get up. It was too early to pretend I had it all together. He walked up to the porch, his boots crunching on the gravel, and sat down next to me without a word. His silence was always louder than anything he could have said. He didn't ask me how I was feeling. He didn't need to. He just sat there, offering a quiet kind of support I didn't know how to ask for. After a few minutes, he took a deep breath and finally spoke. "Well," he said, his voice rough but steady. "What now?" I didn't answer at first, just stared out at the fog rolling across the field. What now? How was I supposed to answer that? I had spent my whole adult life building something, and now that it was gone, I wasn't sure who I was without it. "I don't know," I admitted, letting out a sigh. It's it's like I don't even know what to do with myself." My dad took a slow sip of his coffee, looking out at the landscape. "You built something, Laura. It's not gone. It's just it's just time for you to decide what you want to do next." I thought about that for a long moment. What did I want? I had never asked myself that question. The museum had always been the answer, the purpose I had followed, the thing I had worked for every day without even thinking about it. My dad watched me closely, as if waiting for me to find the words. After a moment of silence, he added, "Your mother and I didn't always make the best decisions. But one thing I always knew, your grandfather, he built that museum and then you carried it. Now it's your turn to decide what comes next." I looked at him, a little surprised. My dad wasn't one for sentimental speeches. He wasn't one to offer words of encouragement unless it really mattered. "But I don't even know what to do," I said again, my voice almost cracking. "I don't know where to start." He shrugged slightly. "Sometimes you just have to start somewhere. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be yours." I chewed on his words for a while, still unsure of what to do with them. I had always been the one people relied on, at the museum, at home, in the family. But now, I was at a loss. And the only thing I knew for certain was that I wasn't going to let Elliot's ambition destroy the legacy I had worked so hard to protect. "I bought the secondary archive property a few years ago," I said, more to myself than to him. "I don't think Elliot knows about it. I could renegotiate the lease, maybe even bring it back into the fold." Dad gave me a sideways glance, clearly intrigued by the idea. "You've been quiet about that one," I nodded. I didn't want him to know. Not yet. Dad's brow furrowed slightly. "What are you thinking exactly?" I took a long breath, feeling the weight of the decision ahead of me. "I'm thinking it's time I started thinking bigger. I can't just walk away from everything, even if they think they can replace me. I've got leverage. I've got something they don't." He looked at me for a long moment, like he was weighing the consequences. "Careful, Laura. You know as well as I do, any misstep could sink the whole thing." "I'm not going to sink it," I said, my voice firmer than I had expected. "But I'm not going to let Elliot screw it up either. Not on my watch?" Dad gave me a small nod, as if he understood. "Well then, looks like you've got a plan." It wasn't much of a plan yet, but it was a start. For the first time since Elliot's announcement, I felt something close to determination. It wasn't just about protecting the museum anymore. It was about taking back control. I had a legacy to protect, and now I was going to make sure I did it on my own terms. The next few days were a blur of restless thinking and quiet frustration. I spent most of my time pacing through the farmhouse, sifting through old files, and planning what my next steps would be. My thoughts kept drifting back to the museum, to the staff I had worked with, to the countless projects I had poured my heart into. I couldn't just walk away, not when I knew things were about to fall apart under Elliot's direction. It was Olivia, the museum's lead archivist, who first reached out. She had been one of the few people who had seen behind the scenes, who understood what I had built and what was at risk. I knew her call was coming before I even answered. "Laura!" Her voice came through the phone, strained and urgent. "You need to know what's happening. Elliot's changes, they're already starting to show." I felt my stomach tighten. "What do you mean?" "What's happening?" "There's been talk among the staff. No one wants to say it out loud, but we're all worried. Elliot's pushing for these modernization plans, and it's already affecting the collections. He's cutting corners, skipping essential conservation protocols. It's like he thinks artifacts are just objects to be moved around, not pieces of history. I ran my hand through my hair, cutting corners. This was exactly what I had feared. The museum wasn't just a place for art and artifacts, it was a living testament to the people who had worked to preserve history. If Elliot thought he could treat it like some corporate venture, we were all in trouble. Have you seen anything firsthand? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Yes, Olivia said, lowering her tone. We've already got some artifacts that are being handled poorly. They're not being kept in proper conditions. And some of the curatorial decisions they're making, they're rushing things, Laura. Rushing to open exhibits, rushing to cut costs. If this keeps going, we'll lose the integrity of everything you've worked for. I felt a flicker of guilt at the back of my mind, but it quickly flared into anger. I can't let this happen. The museum, my museum, was about more than just displaying things. It was about preserving them. If Elliot was too short-sighted to see that, I had no choice but to act. Keep me posted, I said, after a long pause. And if you can, gather some more evidence. I want to know exactly what's being changed and where. We might need it down the line. I'll do what I can, but Laura, she hesitated. I just don't know how much longer we can keep this quiet. Staff morale is already low. They're scared. Some of them are talking about leaving. I could feel the weight of it all settling over me, like a heavy cloud. I can't lose them, I thought. I can't lose this place, not after everything. I'll handle it, I said, my voice more certain than I felt. We'll fix this, Olivia, I promise. After I hung up, I stood by the window for a long time, watching the clouds drift by. The day was so quiet, so still, and yet everything inside me felt like it was about to break apart. I had always told myself I could walk away from the museum if it came to that. But this wasn't just walking away. This was losing everything. I knew I needed to take action, and fast. The quiet life I had imagined for myself here wasn't enough anymore. If I wanted to protect what mattered, I was going to have to play hardball. I needed to bring in my lawyer. I needed to make sure Elliot understood just how much he was underestimating me. I had to protect the archive property I had secretly bought. If that was my leverage, I was going to use it to make sure the museum remained intact. I sat back down at the kitchen table and pulled out the file on the archive property. There were still months left before the lease was up for renewal, but if I could get the board on my side, I could negotiate a deal that would give me more control over the museum's future. But first, I had to be prepared. I had to make sure I had all the evidence in hand before confronting Elliot. A few hours later, I was sitting in my lawyer's office, staring at a stack of papers that felt like a mountain. We went over the details carefully, making sure everything was in order. Laura, my lawyer said, her tone turning serious as she slid a document across the table. If you're serious about using the archive property as leverage, you need to be prepared for a fight. Elliot won't take this lying down. He'll fight you every step of the way. I nodded, my resolve hardening. I know, but I'm not backing down. Not this time. As I left her office, I felt a sharp sense of purpose in my chest. There was no going back. If Elliot thought he could just walk in and destroy everything I had built, he was in for a rude awakening. Back at the farmhouse, I pulled out the photo of my grandfather again. His face, worn with age and wisdom, stared back at me. He had fought for this place. He had fought for the museum to be more than just a collection of artifacts. And I would too, for him, for the museum, for everything we had worked for. It was time to make my move. I was done sitting quietly. The museum was mine to protect, and I would do whatever it took to make sure Elliot understood that. The week that followed felt like a waiting game, each day dragging by slower than the last. I spent hours combing through old files, checking over the lease agreements for the archive property I had secretly bought years ago, gathering my thoughts and preparing my next steps. But it wasn't until a Thursday afternoon, when I found myself standing in front of the county archives, that things really started to shift. I hadn't expected to go digging around in town for answers, but something felt off. I'd heard a few whispers from Olivia, and a few more rumors from some of the staff about things not adding up with Elliot's modernization plans, and it started to nag at me. The more I thought about it, the more I felt like I was missing something important. As I entered the cold, sterile building, the musty smell of old paper filled my nose. The archives had always been a place of secrets, history hidden in dusty boxes and crumbling ledgers. The thought of Elliot poking around here, trying to squeeze more profit from the museum's legacy, made my blood boil. I wasn't going to let that happen. Not on my watch. I found the desk where I knew the county clerk sat, a woman named Donna, who had been working at the archives longer than I'd been in the museum. She was sharp, quiet, and she knew how to keep a secret. I approached her with a polite smile, though my mind was already working through the questions I needed to ask. Laura Bennett, she greeted me with a quick nod. What brings you to these parts? I leaned on the counter, lowering my voice. I need to see the records for Cultural Nexus, I said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. I'm sure you've heard of it? Donna's eyes narrowed slightly, and her lips pressed together in a thin line. Cultural Nexus? Yeah, I've heard the name come up a few times recently. What exactly are you looking for? Anything related to permits, filings, or applications under that name? I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. They're using the museum's name for something, and I need to know exactly what it is. She hesitated, clearly not thrilled by the request. But after a long moment, she sighed, clearly deciding it was better to cooperate than to get involved in whatever I was after. I'll see what I can find, she said, disappearing into a back room behind the desk. I stood there, glancing at the old leather-bound records on the shelf, trying to quiet my rising suspicion. Something didn't sit right about all this. Cultural Nexus wasn't just a name, it felt like a strategy. I had to know what Elliot was up to. A few minutes later, Donna returned with a handful of documents, looking more than a little uncomfortable. She handed them over to me without a word, and I could see her reluctance in the way her fingers almost seemed to hesitate. I flipped through the papers quickly, scanning through permits and business licenses. But as I reached the last document, my eyes froze on one crucial piece of information. Cultural Nexus wasn't just a name. It was a company. A private company that was quietly setting up shop across the county, filing permits for a series of new exhibition spaces, each one modeled directly after exhibits at the Merrowfield Museum. My stomach dropped as I pieced the details together. Elliot wasn't just modernizing the museum. He was setting up a direct competitor. I looked at Donna, who had been watching me closely. Where's the rest of the documentation on this company? She shifted uncomfortably, but didn't say anything. I didn't need her to say much. The truth was right in front of me. Elliot had been using his position to steal from the museum's operations, using my research and the same methods I had developed over the years to create a for-profit replica of the museum. They were planning to take everything, the name, the exhibits, the heart of what I had built, and turn it into a business. My hand gripped the papers tightly. I had no idea how long this had been going on, or how far Elliot had already taken this, but I knew one thing for sure. He was not going to get away with it. Thanks, Donna, I said quietly, making sure to fold the papers carefully. I'm done here. She nodded and gave me a look that said she wasn't asking any questions. I appreciated that. As I left the building, the weight of the situation hit me full force. Elliot wasn't just trying to push me out, he was trying to erase everything I had done and take the legacy my grandfather had left behind, turning it into something he could sell. I made my way back to the farmhouse, the information burning a hole in my brain. I had always known there were cracks in the foundation, but now I knew exactly where the rot had set in. And if Elliot thought he could dismantle the museum for profit without consequences, he had another thing coming. Back home, I pulled out my phone and called Mark Redding, a private investigator I had hired in the past to dig into business dealings. He was the best in the area, and if anyone could help me take this further, it was him. Mark, I said as soon as he picked up, I need you to look into Cultural Nexus. There's something bigger going on, and I need you to find out who's behind it. You got it, he said, his voice sharp and eager. What's the story? I took a deep breath. The story is that my brother is about to make a hell of a lot of money by stealing my work, and I need to stop him before he does. After hanging up, I stood there for a moment, my eyes scanning the room, my thoughts racing. This wasn't just about saving the museum anymore. It was about protecting everything I had worked for. The only way I was going to win was by using the very thing Elliot thought he could destroy, my legacy. I had a fight ahead of me, but now I was more certain than ever that I wasn't walking away. Not this time. Not when there was so much more at stake. I didn't waste any time. If Elliot thought he could take the museum and turn it into his own personal empire, he was sorely mistaken. But to do anything about it, I needed more than just anger. I needed a strategy. I needed allies. The first person I reached out to was Henry Talbot. He was a retired board member, and he had been fiercely loyal to my grandfather's vision for the museum. He had sat through countless board meetings, always advocating for preservation over profit. He wasn't going to be an easy person to sway, but I knew if anyone could help me steer the ship back on course, it was Henry. I called him early the next morning, before the world had fully woken up. Henry? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, even though the tension was rising inside me. It's Laura. We need to talk. Laura? His voice was groggy, but sharp enough that I knew he wasn't entirely asleep. What's going on? I think Elliot is trying to destroy everything you and my grandfather worked for, and I need your help to stop him. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, followed by a quiet sigh. I knew Henry didn't take things like this lightly. He had always been the one to stick to the principles, even when they didn't line up with what was popular. I knew it, he finally said, his tone low but filled with the kind of conviction that told me he was already on my side. I've heard things. He's been making moves with that cultural nexus company, hasn't he? I froze. How did you know about that? I've been keeping my ear to the ground, Henry replied. I know some of the newer board members have been singing Elliot's praises. I've heard whispers about his plans to turn the museum into something more corporate, but I didn't think he'd go this far. Well, he has, I said, frustration creeping into my voice. And he's using my work to do it. He's trying to build a competing gallery network using the museum's methods and research. It's all happening right under our noses. Henry exhaled slowly, the weight of the situation settling in. I knew he had a corporate mindset, but this is beyond the pale. Laura, you've always fought for the integrity of the museum. You can't let him take it like this. I felt a small glimmer of hope. Henry was on my side, and he had the experience and knowledge to back me up. I need you to help me. I'm building a coalition to fight back, but I can't do it alone. I'll help, Henry said without hesitation, but we need more than just a few of us on our side. The board won't listen to a couple of old-timers like us. You need to make a move, and you need to do it fast. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I'm already working on that. I'm meeting with Serena Cole this afternoon. She runs a rival museum group. If I can get her on board, we might have the leverage we need. Serena Cole? Henry asked, surprise creeping into his voice. She's no small player, Laura. Are you sure about this? I don't have many options, Henry. She's one of the few people who can help me get the museum's collections into safe hands. And if I can get her to back us, we'll have a real shot at bringing down Elliot's empire before it even starts. There was a pause on the other end. Henry's voice softened. You're playing a dangerous game, Laura, but I've seen you fight before, and if anyone can turn this around, it's you. I'll keep you updated, I said, hanging up the phone with a sense of resolve. At least I wasn't alone in this fight. The rest of the day moved in a blur. I spent hours on the phone with other museum professionals, reaching out to those I had worked with in the past, trying to gauge where their loyalties lay. The more I spoke to them, the more I realized how divided the board had become. Many of them were loyal to my grandfather's vision, but they were hesitant to make waves against Elliot, especially with his growing corporate influence. By late afternoon, I drove into the city to meet Serena Cole. She ran one of the most respected rival museum groups in the area, and though we had been friendly over the years, we had never truly worked together. But I had no choice now. I needed her resources, her expertise, and above all, her influence. Her office was sleek, modern, the kind of place that screamed professional. She greeted me with a firm handshake and led me into a minimalist conference room. She had a sharp presence, her dark eyes studying me with an intensity that made it clear she was assessing me as much as I was assessing her. I'm glad you reached out, Laura, she said as we both sat down. But you know this won't be an easy favor to ask. What exactly do you need from me? I laid it all out for her. Everything that had been happening at Marrowfield, everything that Elliot was trying to do, and how I needed her to back me in a proposal that would give us control over the collection's management. I explained how, if we could get her organization involved, we could protect the museum's legacy from being destroyed by Elliot's corporate ambitions. Serena listened intently, never interrupting, her eyes narrowing as I spoke. When I finished, she took a slow breath, clearly thinking it over. You're asking me to jump into a battle that could cost me a lot, she said, her voice calm but firm. Why should I risk my reputation, my organization's resources, on something so uncertain? I met her gaze without flinching. Because if you don't, Elliot's vision for the museum will drown out everything we've worked for. You know as well as I do that history can't just be commodified for profit. This is about more than just a museum. It's about protecting something irreplaceable. If you help me, we can give Marrowfield a future. If you don't, it becomes just another corporate venture. For a long moment, Serena said nothing. Then she finally spoke. All right, she said, standing up and extending her hand. You've got my support, Laura, but you'll need more than just me to make this work. We'll need to bring in the right people, those who understand the stakes and have the power to back us. I shook her hand, feeling a rush of relief. I'm counting on you, Serena. Together, we'll take this fight to Elliot. As I left her office, I felt a sense of momentum building. I wasn't just fighting for the museum anymore. I was fighting for its survival and for everything it represented. With Serena on my side, I knew the battle was far from over. But now at least, I had the allies I needed to make sure Elliot didn't win. The board was about to learn that I wasn't going down without a fight. The board meeting was set for the following week. Elliot had called it, no doubt to push through his latest set of changes under the guise of streamlining operations, something that seemed to have become his favorite word since his appointment. But I had something to say about that, something that would throw his plans into chaos. By the time I walked into the room, I had already mentally rehearsed my speech 100 times. The sleek modern conference room felt colder than usual, the long glass table reflecting the tense energy that hung in the air. The board members, the ones who remained loyal to the original vision of the museum, sat on one side, while Elliot's team, his corporate backers, sat on the other. I could already tell where the divide was. Elliot sat at the head of the table, a smug smile on his face. He looked every bit the part of the confident corporate leader, the suit, the polished shoes, the overly rehearsed charm. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed he was actually the man who should be leading the museum, the man with all the right ideas. I took a deep breath as I walked to my place, across from him, as planned. Serena sat beside me, her presence solid and unwavering, a silent testament to the alliance I had been building. Henry Talbot was in the back of the room, a quiet observer, though his piercing eyes told me he was more engaged than he let on. Welcome, everyone, Elliot began, his voice smooth and confident. Today we're here to discuss the future of the Marrowfield Museum, a future where we embrace new ideas and innovative approaches to make sure we stay relevant and sustainable in this ever-changing world. We need to modernize, and that starts today. I held my tongue. The more he spoke, the more I felt the tight grip of frustration closing in. He was so sure of himself, so convinced that his corporate mindset was the only path forward. But what he didn't realize was that the museum was more than just a collection of artifacts. It was a living thing. It was built by passion, by a commitment to preserving history, not by profit margins. Before we dive into the specifics, Elliot continued, adjusting his glasses, I'd like to introduce a proposal that will help move us into the future. We're looking at new ways to generate revenue and expand our reach, including partnerships with cultural institutions, a more streamlined curation process, and he didn't get a chance to finish. I slammed the folder I had been holding onto the table, the loud thud cutting through his words. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to me. Excuse me, Elliot, I said, my voice colder than I expected, but calm, controlled. Before you go any further with your vision for the future, there are a few things you need to understand. Elliot's eyebrows shot up, his smile faltering. Laura, what are you? I've been listening to your plans, and I've seen the damage you're already causing, I interrupted. But let me show you something. I slid the folder across the table toward him. This is a proposal for a new venture, one that directly competes with the Marrowfield Museum using its own resources. This is what you're really doing behind closed doors. There was a collective gasp from the room. I could feel the tension rising as Elliot's confident expression wavered, his eyes flicking to the folder and back to me. What is this? He asked, his voice suddenly strained, trying to regain some control. This is Cultural Nexus, I said, leaning forward slightly, my tone unwavering. A company that has filed permits to create competing exhibits, using the very methods and research I developed for this museum. It's your little plan, Elliot, isn't it? To turn the Marrowfield Museum into something you can brand and sell, just like any other corporate venture. It's not enough to modernize, it's about stealing from the museum's legacy. A murmur ran through the room. The board members who had been skeptical were now fully awake, their eyes darting between Elliot and the documents I had laid out. I could see the pieces clicking into place for them. For all his smooth talk and charm, Elliot had underestimated just how far I was willing to go to protect what I had built. Elliot, I continued, my voice louder now, more authoritative. You've been using your position to line your pockets, using my research and the museum's name to create a for-profit competitor. This isn't about modernization. This is about you turning the museum into your personal money machine, and I won't let it happen. Elliot's face reddened as he stood up, the chair scraping against the floor. This is absurd, he snapped, his voice rising. You don't know what you're talking about. I'm trying to bring this place into the future. You're just holding on to some old relics of the past, Laura. I didn't flinch. You want to talk about the future? I asked, standing up as well, matching his anger. This museum is the future. It's not some corporate branding experiment. It's a place of history. And if you think you can take that away from me, from my grandfather's legacy, you're wrong. The room was dead silent now, every eye on us as the tension between Elliot and me built to a breaking point. Elliot, I said, my voice steady now. I own the secondary archive property you've been using to fuel your little project. I've held onto it for years, quietly, but now it's time to put it to use. I'm negotiating its lease, and I will be bringing in a new team to oversee it. I will be in charge of the museum's future, not you. Elliot's face went pale as the room erupted into whispers. He looked at the board members, his usual smugness fading into something more desperate. You can't take this place, Elliot. I cut him off, my voice cutting through the chaos in the room. You can't just erase everything we've built here. I'm not going to let you ruin it for profit. Henry stood up then, his voice carrying the weight of years of experience. I've seen enough. I've been part of this museum for longer than you've been in charge, Elliot, and I stand with Laura. We won't let you destroy everything we've fought for. The other board members shifted in their seats, some nodding, some looking uncomfortable. It was clear they were torn, but it was too late. The truth was out. Elliot stood there, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for words, but nothing came. The smugness, the confidence, it was gone, replaced by fear. He realized in that moment that he had overplayed his hand. A vote was called. The motion to remove Elliot as director passed by a narrow margin. There were murmurs, some shocked, some relieved, but all agreeing that it was time for a change. Elliot's face twisted in anger as he stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. This isn't over, he snarled, his eyes burning with fury. You'll regret this, Laura? I didn't say anything as he stormed out of the room. I had won, but I knew it wasn't over. This was just the beginning. And as I stood there, watching him leave, I felt a strange sense of calm. I had reclaimed the museum, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I might just be able to breathe again. But I wasn't done, not by a long shot. This fight wasn't over, and I wasn't going to let anyone, least of all Elliot, take the museum from me. It had been a year since that heated boardroom confrontation. A year since I had stood up to Elliot, since I had taken back control of the museum, and I was finally starting to see the fruits of my labor. As I walked through the newly restored Merrowfield Annex that morning, a sense of peace washed over me. The walls, once faded and in disrepair, now gleamed under the soft, warm lighting. The air felt different, lighter, more alive. The exhibits were no longer hurriedly thrown together under Elliot's modernization plan. They had been carefully curated, just as they had always been, with respect to the past and a keen eye for the future. My future. I stopped in front of a display case holding some of the museum's most priceless artifacts, items that, just a year ago, had been mishandled under Elliot's rush to cut costs. Now, they were protected, showcased with the care they deserved. Olivia, the lead archivist, came around the corner, holding a clipboard with updates on the latest restoration project. Her face broke into a smile when she saw me. Laura, she said, her voice full of warmth, I think you'll be happy with the latest progress. The annex is looking better than ever. I nodded, my heart swelling with pride. It's incredible, Olivia. You've done a fantastic job. I think we've all done well, she said with a smile, looking around at the transformed space. The whole team has really come together, and the collection's stronger than ever. It's like we're reborn. We've reclaimed our place, haven't we? I smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment that I hadn't felt in so long. We have, and we're not done yet. I turned back toward the exhibit, my mind racing with ideas for the future. We had a long road ahead of us, but for the first time, it felt like the museum was back on track, stronger and more unified than ever. As I walked deeper into the annex, I spotted a familiar face, a young curator who had started just after my return. She was meticulously cleaning the edges of one of the display cases, taking extra care to ensure everything was perfect. I approached her smiling. "How's everything looking?" She stood up, brushing her hands on her apron and smiling back. "Everything's running smoothly, Laura. The staff is really feeling like we've found our footing again. It's good to have the passion back. It's good to feel like we're preserving history, not just selling it." Her words hit me like a breath of fresh air. The team was back. They had their purpose again. "Well, it's not just the staff, is it?" I said with a wink. "This place has always been about something bigger than just us. It's about the legacy we protect, the one my grandfather fought so hard for." The young curator nodded, her eyes shining with renewed enthusiasm. "We're ready to carry it forward, Laura. All of us." I turned and headed toward the offices at the back, where I was due to meet with Serena Cole. We had been in talks for a while now, solidifying the partnership between her institution and ours. Today, we were finalizing the deal. If everything went well, it would guarantee Merrowfield's place as a leading institution in the preservation community, and it was a chance to put the museum in the hands of those who truly understood its value. As I walked down the hallway, I passed by a few more staff members, all of whom offered nods and smiles. The energy in the museum had changed. There was a quiet confidence now, a pride in the work we were doing. The darkness of Eliot's short-lived reign had long since faded, and in its place, we had rebuilt something lasting. When I reached the conference room, Serena was already there, flipping through a stack of papers, waiting for me. She looked up as I entered, her expression softening into a smile. "Laura," she said, standing to greet me, "it's good to see this place thriving again. You've really done it. You've brought it back." I returned her smile, taking a seat across from her. "We've done it, Serena. It's not just me. It's everyone, staff, the board members who've supported us, and you. Your backing has been crucial." Serena nodded, flipping to the final page of the contract. "And it's going to continue to be crucial. We've made a solid deal here. The exhibition exchange is going to open doors for both of our institutions. It's good for the community, it's good for history, and frankly, it's going to be good for us." I signed the final document, the weight of the decision finally sinking in. This was it. We had just secured the museum's future in a way I never thought possible. It was no longer about fighting against something. It was about building something new, something stronger. Serena placed the pen down and leaned back, folding her hands. "You've got one hell of a fight in you, Laura. I can see why you're the one holding the reins here. This museum is in good hands." I looked at the papers in front of me, the partnership agreement officially sealed. But it was more than just a business deal. It was the culmination of everything I had fought for. It was the future of Merrowfield, and it was secure. "Thank you, Serena. This is just the beginning." As we shook hands, I felt a weight lift from my chest. There was no longer a shadow hanging over the museum. No more backdoor deals, no more underhanded moves. It was ours again. My grandfather's legacy, my legacy, was intact. The museum would continue, not just as a place of history, but as a symbol of resilience, of community, and of the people who fought to protect it. As I stepped out into the bright daylight, I felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that I had fought, I had won, and now I could finally begin to look forward. I wasn't just a guardian of the past anymore. I was part of the future, and that future was ours.